The Russian army has waved the white flag. With this operation organized by the Ukrainian army, Russian soldiers suffered a huge blow. The withdrawal of Russian troops has become a matter of time. Tuesday, the Ukrainian army carried out successive attacks on the headquarters, where there were about 5 battalions of soldiers decamped. Hearing this, Putin went berserk with anger. The Kremlin, on the other hand, had to issue a red alert. In the last days of the Ukraine-Russia war, the Ukrainian army achieved a very serious superiority in the region. However, the Russian army lost almost all of the territories it occupied at the beginning of the war. Ukraine had now established superiority in many regions. The most important of these was the Bakhmut region. The Russian army has started to have problems in many regions now because of the defeats it has received in this region, and the Russian army had no choice but to withdraw. With this latest operation of the Ukrainian army, the Russian soldiers have no strength left to withstand. These consecutive defeats of the Russian army indicated that they were not managed well enough from a military point of view. That is why Russian soldiers were very much affected by even the slightest move of Ukraine. The biggest reason for this is that the Ukrainian army was now trying to take even the slightest opportunity to expel Russian soldiers from its territory. However, the information obtained by the Ukrainian intelligence network was very important. Ukraine took advantage of this opportunity and took action immediately. According to the instructions given by Putin, the Russian soldiers took a defensive position. That's why the Ukrainian soldiers were moving more comfortably now. But the Ukrainian army was still continuing to organize operations with a large team because it could not completely expel Russian soldiers from its territory. After that, the Ukrainian intelligence network detected a Russian military headquarters in the Donetsk region. That's why all the balances in the war have changed. He did not expect any attack from the Ukrainian army, as the Russian army had moved to a defensive position. That's why the Russian soldiers started preparing to make a move. After this security neglect by Russia, everything necessary for the Ukrainian army to make moves had been completed. Ukraine has assigned flag officers to explore the Donetsk region for security purposes. However, the Ukrainian intelligence network was so developed that it even had agents inside the Russian military. The information learned from these agents was enough to decipher the headquarters. But the Ukrainian army had a problem. There were many more soldiers in this military headquarters than usual. There were approximately 5 battalions of Russian soldiers. That's why the Ukrainian army had to organize a very large operation. The Ukrainian army immediately began to provide the weapons and ammunition it needed. Joule. But it was very important to use these weapons correctly. Although the number of Russian soldiers was large, they were not prepared for such an operation. After that, the Ukrainian army moved in with tanks and armored vehicles. The Ukrainian army camouflaged HIMARS and placed them within 2 kilometers of the military headquarters. Infantry from the Ukrainian special forces began to advance in the region in camouflage. The HIMARS would try to distract the Russian soldier before the infantry attacked, and the HIMARS began to attack successfully. The HIMARS were firing decently over the Russian headquarters. After that, Abrams, who was 2 kilometers behind, had also started to attack. Thanks to the uranium contained in Abrams' bullet, a major blow was dealt to the Russian headquarters. The Russian soldiers were surprised by what they suffered, and they immediately started evacuating the headquarters. The Ukrainian army was trying to show 12 tanks. Seeing this, Russian soldiers began to attack these tanks. Russian soldiers realized too late that the Ukrainian army was surrounding as they tried to attack the tanks. But the Ukrainian army attacked at an unexpected moment. At the same time, the Ukrainian army directed the remaining tanks to the area, so he moved towards the headquarters in these tanks. While the Russian army was trying to use its armored vehicles, HIMARS prevented this thanks to the missiles it sent. However, there was no longer a chance for the Russian army to escape. That's because Ukrainian soldiers have blockaded the area. Although the Russian soldiers wanted to continue fighting, they could not access the explosives because the ammunition depots were outside. The neglect of security measures by Russian soldiers has given a huge victory to the Ukrainian army. However, the Ukrainian army had activated signal jammers before starting the operation. The Russian army could not ask for help from the center because of signal jammers, and he had to surrender obligingly. Russian soldiers tried to get out of the headquarters, and he surrendered with the white flags in his hands. The Ukrainian army took 2,300 soldiers prisoner with this operation. Ukraine has gone down in history as one of the most captured operations since the Russian war began. When Putin learned of the defeat, he went berserk with anger. With this anger, Putin began not to send many of his troops to the Bakhmut region. There was a great tension between the soldiers who decamped to this region and the Ukrainian army. Putin has made moves to take the Bakhmut region many times, but he did not succeed in any of them, and as usual, he did not succeed in this operation either. Now the Ukrainian army has begun to establish a very serious superiority in the Bakhmut region. The Ukrainian army has raised their security importance to the highest level in order not to lose this superiority. The Russian soldiers, on the other hand, did not have the strength to take even the slightest step. The Ukrainian army was becoming more motivated and more willing to fight after these successful operations. But why Russia is so persistent about Bakhmut has puzzled the whole world. The reason for this was related to the economic crises in Russia. The most important military unit in the Russian army was known as the Wagner Army. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the CEO and founder of Wagner, used to be Putin's cook. One of the most important regions in Yevgeny Prigozhin since the beginning of the war was the Bakhmut region. That's why Wagner's army was stationed near the Bakhmut region. Thus, Ukrainian soldiers began to organize operations in this region all the time. The Bakhmut region was very important for Ukraine, so he was doing everything in his power to establish dominance, and the Russian army did not have the strength to respond to this. Prigozhin was becoming quite uncomfortable with this situation because his goal was completely different. The Bakhmut region was strategically located in a very important position. But, more importantly, it was very rich in terms of natural resources. Prigozhin, the CEO of the Wagner army, was very interested in this part of natural resources, because it was claimed that Putin would cover the wages of mercenaries in the Wagner army from these natural resources and mines. If Putin could not invade the Bakhmut region as soon as possible, he would not be able to pay the mercenaries in the Wagner army. This would cause Russia to interfere more. Taking advantage of these disturbances, the Ukrainian army began to organize larger operations. The Russian army, tired of this situation, was looking for excuses to surrender. At the beginning of these excuses, there was a lack of provisions and ammunition. The inability of the Russian army to meet even the most basic needs was causing riots in the army. Already, most soldiers in the Russian army had been mutinying for a long time because of these issues, but the size of these riots was increasing more and more. Even Russian soldiers were surrendering before the war even started because they did not want to fight against the Ukrainian army. The Russian soldiers, who continued to fight, began to cause unrest in their headquarters. Putin, on the other hand, has deployed his own private army to prevent this situation. Russian soldiers who deliberately surrendered and caused unrest began to receive very severe punishments. But Putin's harsh interventions have made things even more confusing. While Ukraine was turning this into an advantage and gaining strength, Putin's power was under a huge threat.